From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
Tonight, Donald Trump shakes up his national security team.
Mike Waltz, I guess he said he claimed responsibility, I would imagine. Had nothing to do with anyone else. It was Mike, I guess. I don't know. I was told it was Mike.
Weeks after a wave of criticism following that Signal chat scandal, the current national security advisor, Michael Waltz, tapped to serve as the next UN ambassador. What his NSA departure means in the rocky Senate confirmation we could expect when Senate Foreign Relations Committee member Senator Chris Coons joins us.
And could a major trade deal be imminent?
Right now, countries from all over the world, because of President Trump's leadership, are desperate and dying to make trade deals with the United States.
The White House says it's nearing an announcement of a first tranche of trade deals with partners that would reduce planned tariffs, what we can expect, and what's in the fine print.
Plus, we have developments on several fronts tonight, from secondary sanctions announced on Iran oil to the earnings calls now underway for giants like Apple and Amazon, and what Elon Musk is now saying about the future of the Doge.
But we begin tonight with Bloomberg's Washington correspondent Tyler Kendall, who joins us live from worldwide headquarters in New York. And Tyler, a day of turnover in the Trump administration, though it's not actually departures, it's just moving pieces around on the chessboard, if you will.
Right, exactly, Kaylee. And in his post on Truth Social announcing these changes, President Trump said that he thinks that Mike Waltz has served the nation's interests well and that he'll continue to do so. And that's why he's appointing him to be the next U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, though, of course, he won't have that daily access to the Oval Office. Now, as you well know, Mike Waltz came under scrutiny back in March when he inadvertently added a journalist from The Atlantic to a Signal group chat that was discussing pending military attack plans against Houthi rebels in Yemen. But up until now, really, there has been very little public indication that this essentially demotion was pending. In fact, the White House press secretary told reporters almost a month ago today that they thought this case was closed.
As the president has made it very clear, Mike Waltz continues to be an important part of his national security team. And this case has been closed here at the White House as far as we are concerned. There have been steps made to ensure that something like that can obviously never happen again. And we're moving forward. And the president and Mike Waltz and his entire national security team have been working together very well.
So you see Mike Waltz here just yesterday at a cabinet meeting, but a person familiar tells Bloomberg News that it appears President Trump soured after Waltz asked Elon Musk to investigate what happened with that Signal chat. Sources tell us the White House felt Waltz should have just admitted he made a mistake and not suggest something more nefarious was at play. Waltz, of course, has been at the forefront of President Trump's foreign policy agenda, particularly when it comes to the war in Ukraine. He's considered to be very hawkish on Russia, Iran, and China. Waltz is a former three-term congressman and will need to get through Senate confirmation to be the next UN ambassador. So that Signal incident is by no means behind him. Joe and Kaylee, during this announcement, President Trump did say that his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, will serve as the national security advisor for the time being while he continues to lead the State Department.
You just made an interesting point, Tyler. That would involve Senate confirmation, and we're going to have a conversation with Senator Chris Coons about that coming up. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, we thank you so much for the update from World Headquarters in New York. It appears to be the end of the road for Elon Musk's involvement with the Doge. Here's the president yesterday.
I want to thank you for your help. You really have sacrificed a lot. Been treated very unfairly. We just want to thank you very much. And you know, you're invited to stay as long as you want. At some point, I guess he wants to get back home to his cars and his $150 billion. Think of this.
Yeah. It's 160 now.
Yeah, 160.
Tesla stock, of course, has dropped more than 33% since Trump's inauguration, and Musk has lost about a quarter of his personal fortune, roughly $113 billion. Today, Tesla's chair, Robb denied a report that the company's board has started a search for a new CEO to replace Musk. Joining us now with the latest from our headquarters in New York is Ed Ludlow, host of Bloomberg Technology. Ed, I thought that Musk was trying to put any concern around his leadership of Tesla to bed when it reported earnings. He got on the earnings call and basically immediately said, "Don't worry, guys, I'm coming home."
Yeah, he committed to up the amount of time that he will be spending at Tesla and scaling back the amount of time allocated to Doge and the administration. As Joe and I discussed the other day, this is only a surprise to those that have not been paying attention. Any special government employee has a limit of 130 days. This is an interesting development. The Wall Street Journal has reporting that the board conducted an executive search to replace Elon Musk, then citing the chair, as you said, the official Tesla X account denied it. What you need to know is very simple. Like, the board have previously discussed, for example, in the context of Musk's compensation trial, their plans for life after Elon Musk. The idea of long-term succession is not new. Lots of sources tell me that their expectation is that he's also going to spend a lot of time on XAI, not just Tesla. But there's a distinction between long-term succession planning and, I guess, what was reported in the Journal overnight.
Ed, it's great to have you with us here. We've also got a couple of big movers after the bell, and I know that you're super busy with your eyes on Amazon as well as Apple, pointing to lower than expected sales from China and now a new effort to source more chips from the U.S. this year, according to Tim Cook. Have you heard the word tariffs yet?
No. So what both companies have in common is that they said literally nothing officially about trade or tariffs in the earnings release, other than both companies amended the boilerplate in the forward guidance section in Amazon's case and the forward-looking statement section of Apple's case. Both added the word trade, which wasn't in the release or the document from a quarter ago. And in Amazon's case, they added the word trade and tariff. Very little to go on, but clearly the numbers reflect, in Amazon's case, the current period outlook, and in Apple's case, weakness in China, but also some weakness in other sort of categories, that this is going to be a topic on both of the calls, which are about 7 minutes in, right?
How about it? We'll let you put an ear on those for us. Ed Ludlow, thank you so much. The host of Bloomberg Technology with us on Balance of Power. What the national security team shakeup we saw today at the White House with National Security Advisor Michael Waltz means, and the rocky Senate confirmation we could expect when Senate Foreign Relations Committee member Senator Chris Coons joins us up ahead here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. Thank you for joining us. Earlier today, the president announcing the departure, if I can use that term, of National Security Advisor Michael Waltz. He's picking him up for the job now of UN ambassador. The NSA duty is now being absorbed by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The big steps ahead now for Waltz and what could be a rocky Senate confirmation with Delaware Senator, Senate Foreign Relations Committee member Senator Chris Coons. It's great to see you in studio. Thanks for joining us, Senator, on Bloomberg TV and radio.
You,
we have a lot of questions for you about the process.
I'll bet you do.
And these hearings, I bet you do as well. And I'd like to know what some of your questions will be. But to start off with your reaction to this move by the White House, this solution, if you will. Some are suggesting that Mike Waltz failed up. Should he have been fired?
Look, who I think should be fired is Secretary Hegseth, because at the end of the day, he's the one who has repeatedly misused critical classified information, added various people to different signal chats and chains, and hasn't faced any accountability for that.
So they got the wrong guy.
That's partly my view, yes. And I do think that 100 days into this administration, our relations with most of our core allies have been strained and tested by the tariffs, by some of the unexpected threats from President Trump. As I've met with representatives of partner and allied countries, they say he's threatening Greenland, he's threatening the Panama Canal, he's threatening Canada. What's going to come next? So I do think that Mike Waltz, if confirmed to be UN ambassador, will have his hands full. And I think our relations with much of the world, including our closest allies, have gotten more strained, more attenuated in the last 100 days.
Well, the operative word you just used there, Senator, is if he is confirmed. Your committee will have the ability to question him in a confirmation
Yes, we
hearing.
will.
Given even the criticism we have had from your colleagues across the aisle about the Signalgate episode and what was shared, the inadvertent addition of Jeffrey Goldberg, do you think he can make it through committee, let alone on the floor?
We'll see. He certainly had his critics in the Republican caucus as well as in the Democratic caucus. He didn't have all that much time to serve as National Security Advisor. Look, this is repeating a pattern from the first Trump administration where there's a lot of shifts in personnel, a lot of changes, a lot of people in acting roles. Elise Stefanik, as you know, was nominated to be the UN ambassador, then pulled out because the margin Republicans have in the House is so tight, and they don't know whether they can yet pass their big, beautiful bill, as Donald Trump describes it, to slash taxes and also cut Medicaid and cut other critical social programs here in the United States. So 100 days in, President Trump hasn't kept key promises to reduce prices, to solve the war in Ukraine on day one, and we're already seeing central figures in his administration moving around in the deck chairs.
On April 16th, you demanded information from the White House about the contents of that signal chat and the circumstances surrounding it. Did you hear back? Do you have that information? Okay.
Nope.
Will this hearing bring it forth?
It's certainly an opportunity to press for answers. But one of the features of this White House is that I have sent, along with other Democrats, dozens of letters in my oversight capacity, whether on the Judiciary Committee, on the Appropriations Committee, where I'm the senior Democrat for defense appropriations, or on the Foreign Relations Committee. And the vast majority of my letters have gone unanswered.
Well, we'll see if you can get some answers when this confirmation hearing ultimately is set. I also want to ask you about the other individual who is involved in this movement here, and that is Marco Rubio, adding now another job to what was already becoming a pretty long list. You confirmed him. You cast a vote to confirm him as Secretary of State of the United States. Now he is also USAID administrator, archivist, and apparently acting national security advisor.
I don't think
is that too much for one man?
He may have his talent and experience, but that is way too much for any one person, particularly given the ways that the chaos that Trump causes in our international relations keeps propagating outwards. So Secretary Rubio's got more and more on his hands. And managing all of this, resolving some of these crises, reducing some of the chaos is a real challenge for him in the days ahead.
When these hearings begin, will you subpoena Jeffrey Goldberg from The Atlantic to find out how he got on that phone?
Well, we should, but bluntly, the issuance of a subpoena by the committee requires votes from the majority, not just the minority.
What kind of cooperation do you think you'll have from the Republican leadership?
Probably pretty minimal.
None.
I will say this, the chairman and the ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Risch and Senator Shaheen, have been trying very hard to make it a more functional committee. Relations under the previous Democratic chair really broke down almost completely with Senator Risch, and they've been making some progress on that. It's not impossible that we'll work together to get the information the committee needs and deserves for a robust confirmation hearing. But I'll just be blunt, I'm not optimistic.
Well, and as we consider the issues your committee is looking at, the same issues that you were just alluding to, Marco Rubio is dealing with, we got some news from President Trump separate to this today about secondary sanctions on buyers of Iranian oil, trying to amp up pressure on the regime as they look for some kind of nuclear deal. Are you broadly supportive of measures like that? Is actually that what it takes to get Tehran to the table?
I'm broadly supportive of pressure on the Iranian regime. They are the greatest source of terrorism and chaos in the Middle East, and I do think that there's bipartisan support for increasing pressure to get Iran to the table to try and get back into a more comprehensive deal, one that doesn't have sunsets, one that includes some of their secondary support for terrorist proxies in the region, particularly including the Houthis and their ballistic missile program. That would be a major diplomatic and security accomplishment if the Trump administration could get that done. I'm also a co-sponsor of Senator Lindsey Graham's bill that would proactively put really punishing secondary sanctions on Russia and Russian oil sales as a way to, frankly, recognize that Russia has been playing President Trump, that President Zelensky of Ukraine has been willing to come to the table, willing to embrace a ceasefire. Putin has not. And several of my Republican colleagues have publicly recognized that they've been playing Trump, and it's time for us to apply more pressure on Russia in order to get closer to a just outcome in their war of aggression against Ukraine.
There was an attempt in the Senate to apply some pressure on the White House over tariffs.
Yes.
Yesterday, we spoke with Senator Elizabeth Warren around this time.
Very close.
Yeah.
One vote.
That's broken by
tiebreaker.
the vice president. And I don't know if maybe this would have been different if Sheldon Whitehouse had been available. But was that it? Was that the last call for Democrats on Capitol Hill? Is it up to the courts now?
Oh, I doubt that. I suspect we will come back to the topic of the emergency that President Trump is using to justify tariffs on close partners and allies. A number of us are likely going up to Canada for visits with our friends and partners to the north of us.
Yeah.
The law, now decades old, that President Trump's been relying on for his power in order to unilaterally impose tariffs, was not imagined to empower the president to impose tough tariffs on partners and allies. It was intended for use in wartime. So there was a bipartisan vote in favor of reversing the emergency declaration that Trump's relying on. I don't think we've seen the last of our efforts to reverse that.
Well, and when we consider the impact tariffs are having on American companies, Apple, which just reported earnings, is now estimating a $900 million cost increase in the third quarter from these tariffs. The president, though, contended yesterday that his tariff policy actually hasn't kicked in yet. The stock market we are experiencing, the economy we are experiencing, is still Joe Biden's. What is your answer to that?
That is just flat out ridiculous. He tried to take credit for positives in the stock market before he was elected. And frankly, he needs to take responsibility for his impacts on the stock market, on consumer confidence, on growth in the economy, on the costs that average Americans are facing. He promised he would make America affordable on, what was it, day one. Now we're past day 100 and nothing's going down except the stock market. The price of eggs is up. The price of gas is up. The price of the common things that folks are concerned about, from prescription drugs to housing, has gone up, not down. And that's because of his decisions.
I know you love a yes or no question, Senator. To get back to where we started, are you prepared to vote no on the nomination of Michael Waltz as UN ambassador?
I may very well vote no. I will keep an open mind. It is my job in a confirmation hearing to ask fair and reasonable questions, to keep an open mind and be willing to work across the aisle. But right now, I've got a lot of questions about his continued use of Signal, about Signalgate and how this has happened, and about how seriously he takes handling highly classified national security information.
All right. Well, thank you for answering our questions tonight, Senator. We appreciate your time. That's the Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware joining us here in Washington. And President Trump has announced, as we just discussed, secondary sanctions on buyers of Iranian oil, the global superpower that could be hit hardest by that announcement, and more, when Hagar Chemali of Greenwich Media Strategies joins us next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Iran had no money when I was president. They were out of money. They were bust. They had no money. They weren't giving it to Hamas. They weren't giving it to Hezbollah. They weren't giving it to anybody because they didn't have any money. They were just about bust. And in fact, I put sanctions on last night. Any oil that anybody takes from Iran is not allowed to do business in the United States of America.
President Trump speaking here, Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, alongside Kaylee Lines. I'm Joe Matthew. That was the president warning any person or country that buys oil from Iran will be hit with secondary sanctions, barred from doing any business, he says, with the U.S. The largest buyer of Iranian oil, China. More on that development, plus the expected departure of National Security Advisor Michael Waltz. Now with us, Hagar Chemali, CEO and founder of Greenwich Media Strategies, former director of Syria and Lebanon on the National Security Council. It's great to have you back with us, Hagar. Your thoughts on this move today? Will China, in fact, be hurt the worst?
Well, yeah, the target of the United States under this administration in particular is every move that you're seeing is to target China in general. And so and that's the one that you're seeing every time you see President Trump, for example, waver on whatever negotiation or step or tariff that it might be. When it comes to China, he kind of goes all the way, right? He's intent on seeing it through. So, yes, I think that China is going to be the one that sees the other end of this.
Well, but what about Iran, Hagar? The intended effect is to put more pressure on Tehran. Will it work?
On Iran, let me walk it back a little bit, because I think this is an important one. Under Trump 1.0, when he pursued the maximum pressure campaign on Iran, he Iran significantly felt that pain. And we saw that he's accurate in saying that we saw the ramifications of that play out, for example, on Hezbollah and Hamas. There was a lot of intelligence they declassified at that time where Hamas had to take austerity measures. Hezbollah couldn't pay salaries. They had to reduce their budgets and so on. So this is something we knew that had happened. And so for sure, this is also going to be another part of it. And it's important when you're talking about doing this in the middle of Iran negotiations. there seems to be an effort to compartmentalize talks regarding Iran developing a nuclear weapon, and also an effort to ensure that Iran cannot continue financing terrorism across the Middle East, pursuing its expansionist policies. So yes, without a doubt, it's both. There are just a number of steps you're seeing, a number of maneuvers this administration is making. When, for example, you could say the same when they pursued secondary tariffs against Venezuela regarding anybody who imports their oil. This happened a few weeks ago. That is for sure to undermine Nicolas Maduro's regime. But who's the one that imports that oil? China. So Trump is very focused on undermining China's economic prowess and leveling the playing field and so on. But yes, of course, without a doubt, he also wants to ensure that he pursues his national security objectives vis-a-vis Iran.
Yeah. Hagar, I've got to ask you about the other big story today. As someone who's actually served on the National Security Council, in your time it was in the Obama administration, what does this departure of Mike Waltz mean for the national security apparatus inside the White House? Marco Rubio is going to have 5 titles on his business card now.
Yeah, well, I will say that it's not, you never want that much volatility in general when it comes to the NSC in particular. And this is specific to the National Security Council. Most National Security Council leaders, most national security advisors really view themselves as being part of the team. They're very hands-on. They're in the weeds, you know, doing strategies. A lot of them, for example, don't take a lot of high-level meetings. I worked at the NSC under Tom Donilon. Before that, it was General Jones. But Tom Donilon in particular, that was a big feature of the way he worked. He didn't view himself as somebody who should be out doing a lot of meetings internationally. He wanted to roll his sleeves up and do the dirty work. And so this job that Waltz is being recommended for or appointed for or nominated for is totally different, to be ambassador at the U.S. mission to the United Nations. That's really a large part of it is speeches. I was at the UN mission as well, so I have intimate knowledge of both. A lot of that is speeches. A lot of that is diplomatic meetings, bilateral meetings, and so on. But when you just don't want that kind of turmoil in an office where they view themselves as getting their hands in the weeds, really figuring out the strategy, the pros and cons of every policy option. So it's not going to help. But I also, at the same time, it's government. You know, we're all kind of used to political shifts and sudden shifts sometimes. So it might disturb a few things here and there, but they're going to continue for sure. They'll continue moving on. Most importantly is that, according to the press, reportedly, I've seen, and I'm sure you've all seen, that there are folks who are really dismayed or disappointed after what happened with Signalgate and where this national security advisor invited
Hagar, we have to leave it there. Hagar Chemali of Greenwich Media Strategies joining us here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We are looking into and reviewing how the heck he got into this room.
We stand by Mike Waltz. He's doing a tremendous job. I think this is a distraction.
The president has just written on Truth Social that Mike Waltz is going to become the new U.S. ambassador to the United Nations.
Well, there you go. Fabulous.
That last voice was State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce earlier today, taken by surprise over this news. President Trump announcing, quote, "I am pleased to announce that I will be nominating Mike Waltz to be the next United States ambassador to the United Nations, ending his rocky tenure as National Security Advisor. And now, Secretary of State Marco Rubio's tenure in that role begins. As the president also says, it will be he that is serving in the position in the interim." And joining us now here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio with more on these developments is Bloomberg's Laura Davison. So, Laura, this obviously was kind of a move slowly and then all at once thing. We've been talking about whether Mike Waltz was in jeopardy for weeks over Signalgate. It appeared that the White House was going to stand by its man, and suddenly you've got some chess pieces moving around, but he's not technically being fired or even departing the administration, assuming he can be confirmed.
In some way, he is sort of being promoted up. I mean, out of the White House, but to a very cushy job in New York to be the ambassador to the United Nations. This is really, there are two sort of things here. One, it was his involvement in this Signal chat, adding the journalist to this chat, that sort of sparked sort of the beginning of the end, if you will. But it was also that there were these voices around around Trump, folks like Laura Loomer, who were just not happy with the position that Mike Waltz was taking. He was not quite fully in lockstep with the MAGA base. He was a little bit more hawkish, and because of that, that was sort of what led Trump to decide, hey, let's move this guy, out of this job, that has Oval Office privileges, very much in the center of Trump's universe.
You could argue this is the easiest firing to make because it doesn't require Senate confirmation to replace Mike Waltz. And we remember how long General Michael Flynn lasted in the first administration. I think it was about 20 days on this same job. But now he's set up for confirmation hearings. We just talked to Chris Coons about it. Doesn't sound like it's going to be fun. What is he in for?
He's in for a bunch of really tough questions from members of both parties who are not happy with the use of Signal to communicate with government officials, with potentially very sensitive information being shared in these chats. It's not clear that he's not going to get confirmed. Republicans still have a 3-seat majority. It's likely that he will advance, but it creates an opportunity for Democrats to ask some really tough questions and potentially score some points on their opponents.
All right, Laura, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Laura Davison with us in Washington. And for more, we turn now to Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois, ranking member on the House China Select Committee, a member of the House Intel Committee. Congressman, welcome back to Balance of Power. It's good to have you with us here. You actually know Michael Waltz, and I believe you two are pretty close, having served together on the Intelligence Committee. Chuck Schumer today says they're firing the wrong guy, pointing to Pete Hegseth. Do you agree?
100%. I think that Pete Hegseth needs to go. He's an ongoing danger and a security risk to the country. He installed a dirty line in his office, meaning a line that's not protected and secure, in order for him to be able to signal his wife, his siblings, and others with sensitive, and I would argue classified information. And we don't know the damage done by that type of security breach that's happening every day. He needs to go. But, ultimately, I think that, shuffling these people in these different positions is like reshuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's the foreign policy that's the problem with this White House, and pushing our friends, partners, and allies away, especially economically through these trade wars, in addition to other actions, is really harming our national security and our economic security.
Well, when we consider national security, though, Congressman, many of even your Democratic colleagues suggested that Mike Waltz was actually something of a steady hand when dealing with national security issues and intelligence. Do you view national security as now being more endangered in whatever is left in terms of this vacuum that he's leaving in the inner circle in the White House, or is it made more secure by his departure after Signalgate?
No, it's less secure. I mean, when you're listening to Laura Loomer, of all people, on personnel changes, I think that you are making bad decisions. And I think that right now, the Trump administration is making bad decisions on a number of fronts, whether it's in Europe or in the Indo-Pacific with regard to the Chinese Communist Party. I can tell you our adversaries are cheering with regard to these different moves and the chaos that is happening in our foreign policy.
Well, Beijing has not been cheering about President Trump's policies when it comes to tariffs and any number of other issues. There's been a real back and forth on whether we're actually talking to China right now. Congressman, what are you hearing on the China Select Committee about this? And when will there be a meeting between President Trump and Xi?
I don't know. But, one of the most bizarre things is when Donald Trump says that he is currently talking to Beijing, or his administration is, and they deny that that's happening. Somebody is not telling the truth or is just out of touch with reality. And I suspect it's the White House. It's Donald Trump. Something is wrong. And I got to tell you, my constituents are livid right now with regard to these tariffs. I just went on a little tariff tour of businesses in Illinois. And, whether it's the shop that is importing or, bringing in fruits, flowers, and vegetables and having to pay tariffs and pass them along to working families, or whether it's a soybean farmer who's facing retaliation from China on his soybean crops that he's exporting, they are all upset with this president. I think that's why he's extremely unpopular right now.
Well, the president says, though, his ultimate objective is with a longer-term lens, Congressman, that this actually is about not just punishing China for what this White House views as unfair trade practices, but also for getting other allies and trading partners together to counter China and its overcapacity and its sheer output in terms of manufacturing. Are there better ways to go about this, or is there actually something right about the strategy here, if not kind of the level of tariffs that have been implemented in order to see it through?
Yeah, there's a better way. You don't declare a trade war on Canada, for instance, which the Wall Street Journal, which is no liberal newspaper, called the dumbest trade war in history. You need your friends, partners, and allies to work with you to curb the economic aggression that China practices with regard to certain industries. And yes, we all need to work together to do that. But when you're pushing your friends, partners, and allies away, you're unable to do so. And as a consequence, everybody faces higher prices on everything. And that's why the economy shrank in the first quarter. That's why we're probably heading into a recession as we speak, why the markets are tumbling, and why people, I mean, I literally hear this from Republicans, Democrats, and independents everywhere, which is the two words chaos and uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like it's the way the White House is going about it, the way it's executing the plan that has you concerned, because as the ranking member on the China Select Committee, you can appreciate the bipartisan nature of wanting to crack down on China, right? When the White House talks about China stealing our intellectual property, dumping goods, manipulating currencies, you actually agree with the president on all of those, right?
I agree that that is happening with regard to China. However, when you go about your trade policy in the way in which they've gone about it, you're not able to effectively deal with the underlying economic aggression that China is pursuing. And that is what allows China an opening to do its own trade deals with other countries and set different trade rules and basically normalize, if you will, the aggression that they're practicing, whether it's dumping or IP theft, or for that matter, cyber hacking, which it does on an industrial scale.
Congressman, you obviously are speaking to us in your capacity as not just a member of the committee, but as a member of the House of Representatives now. But I'm sure you're well aware of the buzz around a potential Senate run to replace the retiring Senator Dick Durbin. I believe you've said you will have an announcement on that soon. Is there a better time to announce a candidacy than when you're on a tariff tour, when you have these issues, to talk about what are you waiting for to make a decision?
Well, I'm going to have an announcement on this shortly. Right now, though, I'm laser focused on kind of the chaos and uncertainty that people are complaining about, trying to shine a light on it, and trying to do whatever we can to hold people accountable on the other side who are not willing to take action and steps to end it. I should just mention one other thing, which is when I talk about this chaos and uncertainty, I also hear about a couple other things at the same time. They're worried about cuts to Medicaid as well as Medicare and Social Security that might be on the chopping block. And they are livid. They are livid about some of these deportations of American citizens, including 2, 4, and 7-year-olds without any due process. I mean, this is the type of thing that they just don't want to see happen in the United States of America.
But just to be clear on your timing, how quickly are we talking here, considering the lieutenant governor is picking up endorsements and there does seem to be some degree of momentum behind that?
In the near future. And I have to say that, Dick Durbin, one of our greatest senators, and he's still serving, and he's going to continue the fight in the Senate for the remaining time in his term. And we're looking forward to next steps at the appropriate time.
All right, we had to try. Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois, thank you, as always, for joining us here on Balance of Power. Now, President Trump today meeting with House Republicans to discuss potential cuts to Medicaid as part of their massive tax package. We'll discuss the divide over the benefits program when we assemble our political panel. Next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I don't believe at the end of the day that Donald Trump is going to hurt our elderly or our kids. I don't believe that at all.
Donald Trump, his administration, and extreme MAGA Republicans in the House are undermining everything that matters to the American people, including trying to take a chainsaw to Medicare, Medicaid.
There is a group of us that will not support any package that would diminish, meaning taking individuals who are legally eligible for Medicaid off the rolls.
Frankly, they're lying, saying that Medicaid is not a part of it. There's no way they can meet their $4.5 trillion that they are trying to find to give to the wealthiest among us if they don't cut Medicaid. They're lying.
Waste, fraud, and abuse. And I believe that that has to be looked at. I mean, what a disservice to the taxpayer. Frankly, what a disservice to those that legitimately need this help.
We're going to see some kind of really damaging legislation come out, devastating cuts to Medicaid that will hurt families all across the country.
Republican and Democratic lawmakers over the last month discussing the potential cuts to Medicaid that could be included in Congress's massive tax and spending bill. President Trump met with House Republicans on the issue today as they work through the budget reconciliation process. And joining us now for more here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio is this evening's political panel. Roger Fisk, former aide to President Obama and Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Robb Waters, who is now managing partner at the Madison Group. Good to see you both. Robb, as we consider the fact that President Trump has said repeatedly there will be no cuts to Medicaid, it still raises a question of whether there have to be cuts for Medicaid if this ever stands a chance of getting through both chambers of Congress.
Well, you know, first, good to see you. Roger, always good to be here. Joe, thank you. And no, they're not going to be Medicaid cuts because members of Congress have said they're not going to be Medicaid cuts. Ranking members of Congress. Chairmen have said it. President Trump has said it. There's not going to be Medicare cuts.
Donald Trump went even further last weekend to say that we could increase funding for Medicaid. I don't know how much of that is semantics based on the growth of the program, but could you see that happening? Because we're still talking about how to pay for tax cuts.
I can see how we're not going to have Medicaid cuts. Now, I think there's going to be a great discussion about taxes on tips and what that looks like and, you know, whether or not we're all going to make $1 and then get tipped everything else and, you know, where that goes. I'm not confident that that actually clears the House or the Senate, but I know for a fact the 2017 tax cuts are coming and we're not going to cut Medicaid.
Okay, so does that just mean the deficit gets bigger? Because you got to find the offset somewhere, Roger. Where are they, if not in these programs?
Well, thank you for having me, and great to be here with Robb. It will shock absolutely no one to hear that I don't share his optimism on this, although technically I think what we will see is a slowing in the growth of Medicaid. Then the question is how much do they want to play in the gray area of what that mathematical equation means for funding on a year-by-year basis. I do think that that ultimately the universe has a sense of humor. And what I envision at the end of this rainbow for the Republican majority, there's 3.5 million people in Florida on Obamacare. There's 700,000 people in Kentucky on Obamacare. And at some point, whether it's a slowdown in growth of Medicaid funding, et cetera, I envision disruptive town hall meetings where actually swing district Republicans have to answer for cuts to Obamacare, and that will be karma coming full circle.
That's through the looking glass for someone who worked for Barack Obama, I'm guessing.
Exactly, and we remember in 2010 the uproar that created, and that it will now come full circle where people will actually be defending and insisting that it continue.
That would, of course, require lawmakers to hold town hall meetings.
Well, yes, some of them have. We've seen how some of those have gone. There's a lot of upset in some of these districts. And you mentioned Florida, Roger. I do want to talk about Florida, which just had a special election, in fact, to replace in one district Mike Waltz, who left Congress in order to serve as National Security Advisor for President Trump.
And will be confirmed as UN ambassador.
But what do you make of the fact that it is now a movement to UN ambassador instead of National Security Advisor?
I think he's incredibly qualified to be UN Security Ambassador. And, you know, and I think the president will fill out his national security team. But I'm most pleased that Secretary Rubio is also very capably acting national security advisor and, you know, following in the steps of other great national security advisor and and secretaries of state that we've known in past.
What do you think of
remind us
these
of Kissinger.
developments today, Roger? This was interesting. Some suggest the White House did not have this plan when the president woke up this morning.
It strikes me that Steve Witkoff is actually carrying much more of the water that a Secretary of State traditionally would. And ironically, I think Mike Waltz ends up taking this hit because his testimony with DNI Gabbard next to him, I think, was very weak television, which I think it's fair to say in the Trump world is one of the worst crimes that you can commit, is to not be good TV. And the weird thing about that is that now he's going to have to go back to the Senate, and we can all picture the kind of made-for-the-camera, made-for-social media moments that some of these members are going to have as they take Mr. Waltz to task over his stewardship of the national security thus far. And then it feeds into the larger narrative of whether or not the momentum continues and the leaking continues around Secretary Hegseth and all this. So it's not good. And then the idea that Secretary Rubio is going to be doing 2 and 3 different jobs, I think, is not serious.
Well, we talked about all of this with someone who will get to participate in the questioning in that confirmation hearing. Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware was with us earlier this hour.
Who I think should be fired is Secretary Hegseth, because at the end of the day, he's the one who has repeatedly misused critical classified information, added various people to different signal chats and chains, and hasn't faced any accountability for that.
So they got the wrong guy.
That's partly my view, yes.
Does this take up or reduce the heat on Pete Hegseth, Robb?
Listen, we've got a great team at the Department of Defense. Our deputy secretary is unbelievable.
But there's been some turnover on that team, too.
I mean, you know, look, people change.
Could our deputy secretary find himself running the Pentagon sometime soon?
I mean, anything is possible, but probably not this year.
Well, there's a kind of a question, and you've been around Washington enough to have it to maybe take a swing at this. Once the door starts revolving, does it make it easier for someone else to go, or does this actually give Pete Hegseth some time, take the glare off of what he's doing? The president doesn't want to make a change following this immediately.
You know, both Roger and I have worked for an administration, and usually by the second year, especially if it's your last term, people start to go anyway. It's just a natural thing. What is making this amazing just to watch from a political nature, and Roger, and I hope you agree, is not the mistakes that are being made. It's the fact that the Democrats are so incapable of actually messaging. If you guys had a convention today, literally, you'd probably make Hamas your leader. It is so ridiculous on how it is going. And no matter what anybody thinks, I'm a little bit more sanguine on the fact that they couldn't get their act together to come against. It's bizarre to me.
Roger, your response?
I don't foresee Hamas being any part of the Democratic leadership anytime soon. But to go back to the original question about Secretary Hegseth, what really grabs people's attention is a pattern, and then the inner beltway dynamics of this are the intense leaking. I thought the first Trump administration was the most porous that we had ever had, or at least in modern times. And you can see almost on a day-to-day basis people jockeying to push one person out or try to impugn the integrity or effectiveness, professionalism of another. So it's not good this early on. You could say he lasted, 10 Scaramucci's or 3 Mike Slims? Or 9.2 Scaramucci.
According to the man. Robb Waters and Roger Fisk, a great panel and a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Tomorrow is Jobs Day. April payroll's out in the morning. The question is, will the report show a hiring slowdown amid the uncertainty over tariffs? We'll look ahead at the data next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for being with us. President Trump is en route to the University of Alabama right now, set to give a commencement speech in Tuscaloosa tonight. A live look of the room that is waiting for him as he is set to speak a short time from now.
And of course, then we look ahead to tomorrow when the Bureau of Labor Statistics is set to release their April jobs report. The estimate for non-farm payrolls, 138,000. The expected unemployment rate, 4.2%. And of course, we'll have analysis of those numbers tomorrow, plus what it means politically for the president. You can get more of that in the Washington Edition newsletter, on the terminal and online, and here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.